So I haven't really prepared much of a talk today. I have a lot of notes. I took the train here from London a couple of days ago because I'm a bit scared of flying. So I've been writing this talk on the train and in restaurants. And I think people have been a bit creeped out by me, like sitting in their restaurants just writing notes. If you can't see it, don't worry. There's not really any slides. It's just me talking. But yeah, I guess I should probably say who I am. I work for 8th Light in London. And a lot of my focus in my job has been thinking about diversity and inclusion in my work. Although I'm a software developer, I write code all day. And some of my colleagues are here today as well, so that means I have to cut out about half my talk that I was going to tell stories about them. So, so yeah, this talk's only going to be about 20 minutes now. No, it's a joke. So let's see. Yeah, so who here, out of everybody, who would say they're a member of the craftsmanship community? Yeah, so you all are kind of aware of the concepts behind craftsmanship and what our values are. And that's what I want to dissect a little bit today. And the kind of brief version of this is we're going to look at what's helping us and what isn't helping us, and what I think we need to remove and change to go forward with. So it's a bit of a retrospective. And I'd actually quite like to make this a bit of a discussion towards the end, so I'll try to go fast. And if you've got questions, write them down, and then we can talk about them afterwards. So there's a question about why we're here. And I think, for me, one of the core ideals of craftsmanship is this lifelong learning. That we are here and we really don't know anything about what we're doing, and we constantly need to learn and figure out what's new and what's important, and bring out new ideas from other people into the community and into our lives. And that's quite different from what's standard in technology. Often people come out of university and that's it. They've learned everything. They know everything there is to know about computer science, and they might pick up a new framework or two, but generally they think they know everything there is to know by the time they're done with their education. And with craftsmanship, we're kind of saying, well, actually there's a whole lot we really need to keep learning and keep practicing and keep getting better at. So that's kind of part of the background to this talk. For me, I think the reason why I'm so concerned about diversity and inclusion is because I'm concerned about the relevance of our community and the growth of our community. I'm probably someone who believes that growth is the opposite of, death in a way of a community. So if we don't want to die as a community, we need to grow. You can't just remain stagnant. There's no such thing as really stagnant. You can't just continue on. And I think there's some symptoms of that already. So, for example, if you look at the communities which are growing and becoming quite huge, there are very specific communities like Node communities are quite big, or maybe perhaps you look at meetups for women or any sort of marginalized group. These are communities which are really getting a lot of input. And craftsmanship communities, aren't really going anywhere. So we have an issue with branding. And I've started to look at that through the lens of diversity and inclusion. And hopefully what I'll do today is give you some ideas about how you can start to think about this and improve it as well. Let's talk about professionalism. So wow, you really can't see anything, can you? That's fine, it's just a photo, it doesn't matter. So any idea, what does professionalism mean to you? Anybody want to suggest anything?
To do the best work possible.
To do the best work possible, yeah.
We are concerned about the case that you build.
Yeah.
what do you believe in as a professional?
So concern about what you're building, is that from an ethical point of view, or like pride, or
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yep, definitely. Yeah, so that's a big part of our community too, is professionalism. This idea that we're not just sat in a corner being moody, you know, that kind of Hollywood stereotype of what a programmer is. We're actually something more. We're human beings. We've got to interact with the world and
Maybe to be honest with the job.
yeah, honesty. Yes, absolutely.
Quality, but it's important to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting one because I think we always have to ask ourselves: are we being honest with ourselves as well? Are we being transparent with others about what we're doing? And I think there's a lot of cases recently where people aren't necessarily honest about what they're doing or their motives for what they're doing. So craftsmanship traditionally has had a little bit of an image problem when people think of us as elitist, for example, and we're not always very honest about that. We talk about being humble, and we say we've got humility, and actually, in that actual fact, a lot of the time we turn our noses up at people who don't TDD, or people who don't use the latest frameworks, or people who don't pair, these kind of things. So yeah, this is again this kind of thing where you have to retrospect on your own behavior and what you think the community is behaving like. And that is where I come from with professionalism. I think there's a very old meaning, a traditional meaning of professionalism, which is kind of what we've talked about. And I think there's a newer meaning, which is, I guess, what I'll go into. Something I've heard a few times recently is this idea that professionalism has always been around, and what it actually means is leaving yourself at home. You don't bring your personal life to work. You just act in a very professional manner, and often people talk about this in the context of complaints from diverse groups, for example. So you might hear people complain about harassment in the workplace, or maybe it could be something relatively simple like childcare, or coming out in the workplace if you're gay. And these are things that for some people are not professional. You should just leave that at home. It's not part of your work life. You come to work to write code and build a product, and that's what you should do in your work time. And so that's kind of the idea that I think is wrong. One of the ideas that I think is wrong. That thought of leaving yourself at home, and actually what you need to do is bring your whole self instead. And that's probably what the industry doesn't do very well. Maybe if you work for a startup, everybody knows each other very personally, and you work hard together, you play hard together. Larger companies, probably not so much. I don't know who here works for a large corporate. I used to work in a large bank, and definitely it was very leave yourself at home. For me as a gay man, I never came out in that work. I worked there for 4 years. I just was not who I really was at home. And how did that affect me? Well, I think it probably added to stress for me. So I think when people aren't their whole selves, you probably see things like anxiety and stress come out. If they have problems at home, for example, and they can't release with their colleagues, and then they have the stress of work on top of that, it's not a great place to be in mentally. So bringing your whole self is important to having that release and having a stability of mind, and knowing you can rely on your colleagues for support when you need them. And there's a whole host of associated things that we talk about, like imposter syndrome, which is something that, if we just accepted people for who they were and really got to know people and let them know it's okay to be whoever you are right at this moment, then maybe they would feel less of an imposter. And if you think about your workplace as somewhere where there's some very, very good, knowledgeable, experienced programmers, and then maybe some junior programmers. What is it that the experienced programmers are doing to make the junior people feel they fit in? Are they doing anything? Probably not, because in our industry, we don't put that effort in. The mature engineers are not told, you need to look after the junior people here. You need to be making sure everybody's okay. So, when I think about professionalism, I'm thinking, well, that's what professionalism is. It's making sure everybody's okay and looked after, respected, and enjoying themselves. I was at a conference once, and there was a talk about culture, and the idea was that culture is simple. You just have to make sure everybody's happy. And then the person presenting said, well, here's how we make people happy. We have beers on Fridays, we have foosball table, we go out and play games together. And their idea of happiness was very fixed to one type of person. It was an idea that, well, if you are this person who likes beers and likes table football and likes all these things, then yes, you're going to be happy here. But there wasn't an awareness that happiness is different things for different people. And to be a professional means, well, you're going to look at who everybody is and really work to understand what makes them happy. And this is totally removed from what professionalism is if you read traditional craftsmanship materials. It's making people happy or making people want to be at work is just, it's too wishy-washy for people. But I think now we're starting to find the language to talk about it, and people have enough experiences of their own to understand what's important there. One of the things a tool that I found useful recently was understanding different personality types. So things like Myers-Briggs type indicator, the big 5 personality traits. And these are things which software developers are often criticized, or people think of them as a joke. But it can be a useful tool to start to open your eyes to how people are different. So I don't know if you know much about Myers-Briggs, but it kind of splits people into different axes. And one of them is, are you a kind of rational thought person, or are you a feeling person? And what that means is, do you make your decisions based on facts, or do you make it based on how you and other people feel? And actually, people operate in a different way, in very different ways on that axis. And I always find it interesting, and again, this is what our community does. People like to bring things back to rational thought all the time. And this isn't helpful to anybody who thinks in a different way. If the rational thought is not the most important thing to them, then they're not necessarily going to reach the same conclusion. But a lot of the craftsmanship community is kind of fixated on this idea of rational thought. And so again, that's something that I think isn't necessarily professional, to not believe that there's a diversity of opinion.
I'm kind of curious that neither you nor anybody mentioned the real meaning of the word professionalism, being skilled or proficient in what you do.
So you're saying that yeah, let me just...
That's what professionalism really is.
Yeah, so you're saying the meaning is that you're skilled in your profession.
Skilled and proficient in what you do. Right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I'm just curious that that's not one of the things you mentioned as
yeah. Well, so it doesn't disagree with what I'm saying, in the sense that what I'm saying is our profession is not about code; it's about people. Does that make sense? I mean, what do you think about that?
No, I fully agree with everything you said. It's just kind of like it's still very important aspects and all those things, but professionalism as a word is about whether you are or you're not skilled in what you do. Yep. Kind of as if we are mixing terms.
Yeah.
Like your impression.
I think people get caught up in, when they read about software craftsmanship and they read, well, this is what professionalism is, and then they're suddenly fixated on this, in this box of professionalism, of that this is what I must be, and they don't stop to think about other aspects that might possibly be part of that or related to that. Is kind of my point. So I definitely look at my work as being a people person and understanding people. And for many of us, I'll come to this later, many of us have technical proficiency. We spent years becoming technically proficient. I write Ruby and JavaScript all day long, and I have experience with C# and C++ and all sorts. But that's not what I'm learning about at the moment. I'm learning about the people stuff, and it's maybe a shame that comes after for everybody. I guess a key skill is listening. If you were to take anything from this, it would be just listen more. Listen to the people around you. Stop trying to profess about things like I'm doing now, but listen to your teammates. Vulnerability is important. I don't know if you've heard of the idea if you need to be vulnerable as a team. You need to be vulnerable as yourself in order to have a successful team, which means you need to be happy to make mistakes. And when you do make a mistake, own up to it. You need to support others in your team when they make mistakes. So maybe that comes back to imposter syndrome that I was talking about earlier. Some people suffer that because they're afraid of making mistakes or afraid that they don't actually know everything. So professionalism also to me is this culture of vulnerability where it's okay to make mistakes and be supported. And we actually do that, I guess, quite well with craftsmanship when we look at apprenticeships and this idea of lifelong learning. It's this that is at its root, that we just don't know everything there is to know. And so that's a key idea that we probably should bring forward into this new professionalism. Okay, I wanted to mention some examples or ask your thoughts on some things which I guess I want to ask, are these professional? So what about working remotely? Is there remotely? Yeah. So is there an issue of professionalism if you, let's say, always work remote? And I ask this because, for example, a lot of large organizations now ban working remotely because they perceive it as something that is, they're not going to get the most productivity out of their workforce.
I think that they are not going to get as much productivity because they're not ready for that kind of, not because it doesn't work or it's not, you cannot be as productive, but it doesn't fit, the behavior that you're trying to put in the organization doesn't fit with what the organization is. So
it doesn't fit with the culture of the organization.
They are, it doesn't fit with their with their mindset.
Right.
So they're kind of right
yeah.
about that.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that it's not useful or you cannot get the same amount of productivity, I would say.
Okay, so you're saying that for these companies it's potentially not.
For them, yeah, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
They would need to change a lot of other stuff in order
yeah.
for that to be able to.
So I think my question then is, if you see craftsmanship as something for smaller companies, or is it something that can actually apply to larger organizations which have a culture which is not necessarily about craftsmanship, but or professionalism, but how does that does it scale, right?
It does apply, but they need a big change of culture. That is not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it does apply, it would work, but the problem is that there is a status quo, a way of working already. This way of working is not aligned with this kind of values. So it's very hard to have big companies or lots of people in general make these huge changes.
Mm-hmm.
So it would work, but any minority movement, it's always harder to become mainstream.
My point of view on that is it works as long as the values of the organization, the already set, the established mindset is aligned with what you're trying to do. Because then you can change the practices, change whatever remotely, pairing, blah, blah. But if the underlying system for that is not there, then you're going to have the plan.
Right.
And
right.
Because of the way that most organizations are built, those value systems are not there.
Yes.
And that's why they have so much trouble adapting to that.
It will most likely never be.
Never, right? But
Well, that's the question,
it's
right?
hard. It's hard.
How do we grow? How do we change culture? How do we?
In some
Yeah.
cases, I mean, my conclusion is simply, in many cases, big enterprises simply, you try for 3 years and you realize it's not going to happen.
So you're defeated. Okay.
It's more likely that company is going to become
Yeah.
new
Yeah, absolutely.
taxi equivalent,
And-
taxi company equivalent.
And that's probably why a lot of us come to craftsmanship or craftsmanship companies, because we've seen that, we've tried to change, we've tried to do something better, and we've repeatedly failed at that. So we join somewhere which has this culture at heart. Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I'm up.
Think about if it applies to bigger companies?
Well, I'm up for the challenge. I think this is, so I asked this, I said at the start that craftsmanship, I think, has to answer the questions about relevancy and growth. And I think these are the sort of things that we need to start answering if we want to remain relevant.
It definitely applies to big companies, because you have as many examples of big companies as you want. It's not about size.
Yeah.
I think size is irrelevant. It's kind of, does it apply to a company
That
who
doesn't
who
share
lived in
the value
1995?
or exactly.
Mm.
So, and if the question is, would it ever apply? I think it could. Like, you can actually change that culture. It's just not going to happen overnight.
Yep.
It's a long game.
It's going to take a lot of
Absolutely.
effort and a lot of people to get involved into that, especially in
Yep.
leadership at
Yep.
all levels of the organization. So,
Yep.
and that's where most companies fail, because they have these unrealistic expectations of, okay, this is cool, these other companies are doing it, let's try it ourselves, but they are not willing to change that
Yep.
mindset, and that's what it doesn't work. No,
Yeah.
it doesn't work because you didn't see beyond what the practice or the tools that you were trying to put into place are, right?
Right.
To say something, because we are talking about big companies like they, but big companies are us. So if all the programmers are involved in the transformation culture, then this will change, because I will not work if they don't have this culture. And if everyone is aligned with this, then leaders will have to accept that.
I disagree with that strongly. I've tried for many years with approach bottom up, and every single time, if you're talking about bigger entities, right, every single time it fails, because until you get the buyout, but real one, not kind of like, yeah, I want everybody to be agile 7 level below, but until you get buyout, you will hit the ceiling and fail, and you're going to hit it again and fail, and fail, and fail, and fail, because there are barriers that you cannot remove from down. That's my kind of...
I think let's move.
Unlimited, so I'm not talking about the world, but my impression is kind of like,
Yeah.
you cannot remove the barriers from down.
I really recognize your viewpoint a lot. I think a lot of us come from that place. I want to move on, but this is perhaps a great conversation for the open space tomorrow.
Yeah.
So let's do that actually. So I want to talk about something that I think we really do right, which is hiring through apprenticeships. And again, retrospective about, is this working for us? Is it relevant? Does it affect how we grow? I remember my first job I got out of university. I was really lucky because I went to a great university, and I remember my boss at the time said, your CV was just at the top of the pile because they're advertising for graduate software developers, and they get hundreds, if not thousands, of CVs come in because thousands and thousands of people graduate from computer science degrees every year, and they all apply for the same jobs. And then, this company had 2 spaces, and they got 1,000 CVs, something like that. All they do is sort them by your university and your grades and your exam results, and then they just look at the top ones. And so I was really lucky. But, we have a great answer to that with craftsmanship, which is that, well, we don't really care at all what you've done before. We care about judging you today. So come in and write some code with us, show us your portfolio, or talk to us about your attitude. And this is actually great for, we talk about diversity and inclusion. It's great for that. It's great for getting people who are career changers. It's great for getting people who didn't necessarily have the chance to go to university. But it's a slower process. So actually have to evaluate a lot more people. So that's definitely inhibiting growth, right? So one of the things we've seen success with Athlight recently is getting involved in meetups and sponsoring events, accessing other people that way. So when we're hiring people, we form relationships with people on a very informal basis. We don't say to people, okay, you've got to apply on our website and then come in and we'll go through this entire very long interview process, which is what we used to do. We used to say, okay, fill in this stuff about yourself and then do this coding challenge and then we'll review it and you give us feedback and blah, 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 blah. It actually takes a long time for people that you don't know anything about. So what we do now is we go to meetups and we get to know people individually and they get to know us. And we don't necessarily have to do any work other than having a chat with them in an evening. And then over time they might want to apply for us. And by that stage, they've already either got a very good chance of applying or they've realized it's not a good fit and haven't applied. So we've started to have some good success with this. And I would say, you know, if the problem is hiring via the craftsmanship methods takes a long time, then this is a route to do it in a much easier way. And of course, meetups, and this is the logo for Queer Code London, which is a meetup I co-founded. And we've hired 2 people through that meetup. And you know, that was a surprise to me. When I started the meetup, I didn't think we were going to hire people. It happened just so naturally almost. And there are so many meetups out there and so many for marginalized groups. And it's quite interesting. I said earlier that the biggest communities that are growing are things like Node and for women and marginalized groups. They're very specific focus, right? And craftsmanship is not specific focus at all. It's very generalist. And I think when we talk about our branding or are we growing, that's one of our issues. We're very, very broad in what we do. Nobody kind of says, oh, well, I'm going to go to a craftsmanship meetup. Like we obviously have, right? But the general population isn't really looking for that. They go into meetup and they find the technology they're using. And I know I've talked to my colleagues about that experience of when we go to meetups and you meet somebody new and you're networking and they ask you, well, what language do you work with? And you will say, well, you know, a lot. And it's very confusing for people when you say you're a generalist. It's just not how normal people, like the people in the wider industry work. They are Node developers or they're React developers. You know, they've got this very specific thing. And if you tell them you're a generalist, it doesn't really compute. So here's where there's for us, again, a relevancy issue. And what I've found with my work with Queer Code is that we can get involved in these meetups. You know, that is a software craftsmanship meetup. It was formed by me and somebody else, Franzi, who you may know from the software craftsmanship community. And software craft's there. It's just not the main thing. And that's true for a lot of meetups. And a lot of the companies who work in the craftsmanship space are sponsoring meetups. They're providing coaches at meetups. So they're there in the background. And I think this is a real route for us, not just for hiring, but also growth to get the word for software craftsmanship out there. I'll come back to that point. I think, the final thing I probably wanted to say is that, there's no reason why we shouldn't be growing and more relevant when it comes to the wider jobs market. If you're a graduate, there's a lot of jobs out there for the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, and FinTech. And often you'll see the job adverts for these companies say, oh, you'll get to work on interesting and difficult problems. And I always find that kind of amusing because if you go to work for Facebook on a very high salary, fresh out of uni, you're going to be working on very stagnant stuff. Like Facebook have their product. All you're doing is maintaining the system. So they say interesting and difficult problems. I mean, they're going to be interesting and difficult in a very sort of minute problem space. With craftsmanship, we kind of have a much bigger worldview. So why can't we compete with that message? With our apprenticeship model, the work we do with meeting new hires through meetups, we should be able to say, no, the work we do is more interesting. We're creating new systems. We're developing new ideas. And that's completely at odds with what the biggest employers like Facebook and Google are doing. And remember, they're reliant on this kind of CV approach of sorting the CVs by grades and university. So, the ideas are there, but we haven't really, I don't feel like we've really uncovered all of them yet. So yeah, moving on, I wanted to talk about codes of conduct. And I'll go through this briefly, because I'm kind of running out of time. Code of conduct, very simply, don't be a jerk, for your definition of what jerk is. Right? So they should be very short pieces of information, and they'd say, kind of, this is what is allowed in this community, and if you don't follow these rules, then goodbye. It's as simple as that. And they'll probably tell you how to lodge a complaint if you have a complaint. This is such a big idea, and even if you go on GitHub now, you can apply them to your code repositories. So in open source, it's very, very important that you have a code of conduct on your repositories. It's like a license. It's just as important as a license. So GitHub will provide one for you. And you should definitely do that on all of your code bases. Even if it's on GitHub and you accept contributions, you should have a code of conduct. And you should have them for your communities as well. And in fact, most of the craftsmanship events do have these code of conducts. And again, it comes back to the idea of relevancy. We in the craftsmanship community, we talk about professionalism and how we should be respectful of each other. But the rest of the industry is talking about codes of conduct. They don't talk about professionalism, they talk about codes of conduct. But they're very related ideas. And so, why are we not following this language? And I'll come on to this point in a little bit. But there's this elitism of craftsmanship where we think we have the best ideas, but the industry is somewhere totally else. It's somewhere, far off. Like codes of conduct is just, you won't read about that in the craftsmanship literature. But yet the most kind of modern craftsmen are actually doing these things. Okay, I'm going to go on. So naming's hard, right? Like this is one of the lessons we have from all of our technical training. Naming is very hard. And the biggest thing here really is that there are a lot of us who no longer use the word craftsmanship. I know I've been using it throughout this talk, but I don't use it at all really. I talk about the software craft community, and that has been a big change for a number of us. It's very simple to do, actually. You might think changing the name is very hard, but it's very simple. You just say, instead of saying, oh, I'm a member of the software craftsmanship community, you say, I'm a member of the software craft community. And instead of saying, I'm a software craftsman, you say, I'm a software crafter. It's very simple to do, and it's an individual choice we can all make. And I think you should all make it. And the reason why is, first of all, there's the man in the middle problem. The fact that it's got man in there, which is, you might laugh, but this is a problem for a lot of people. And our community does have an issue of image. It does have this, people do think of it as this kind of crufty thing for like old white men. And it's not that. If you go to any of the Socrates events, you'll kind of know that we can do better definitely with diversity, but we're really not doing ourselves any favors by aligning ourselves to the medieval guilds of craftsmanship, which were traditionally, for men and very sort of male-focused. I think the elitism here is also fundamental to this issue. I guess what I'm proposing is that when you say software craft, you're removing that elitism as well. So the things that we hold dear to us that I think are important, things like apprenticeship and lifelong learning, they don't really have anything to do with craftsmanship. But I think there is a case for saying, well, we can form a movement called software craft, which maintains all of those ideas and removes all of the crafty ideas that are holding us back. And I think that's, again, the individual choice. You can just start saying it, start using those words. Naming's hard, but we know how to get this right now. Like there are enough people who are making this change to do this. Let me see. I actually had notes on this. Yeah, so the Socrates events have done it. The Slack group, I don't know if you're in the software crafters Slack, and maybe you noticed it used to be the software craftsmanship Slack, and now it's the software crafters Slack. The website changed. All of the people who kind of run that community have made that change very quietly, and it was very easy. It was just a kind of group decision. And I think probably a lot of it came from the Socrates community. If you think about our community as craftsmanship, we have a big culture, and it's big enough to support subcultures. If you go to a Socrates event, you probably meet a lot of people you already know from previous events who are interested in the same things. It might be TDD, classical TDD or Mock's TDD. It might be Elm or JavaScript, whatever it is. You've got your subculture. And that the events I've been going to recently, I'm definitely involved quite heavily in the kind of diversity and inclusion subculture. And these people are thinking really hard about why our events are so male-oriented or why they're so white. And we're thinking about those problems. So you can be involved in your subcultures about TDD in your languages and whatever you want. But there are some people in the community who are working hard to figure these answers out. And when they come with recommendations, it's like they're kind of being your personal brand consultants. If they say to you, we think we should change the name because it's really problematic name, you do well to kind of take that advice and listen to it, because these people have been meeting again and again and again regularly and coming up with ideas. And we're at the point where we think we really have a way forward. And it's a way forward that supports our relevancy and supports our growth into the future. To go back to that point about meetups like Node and meetups for women who are in code, these are the ones which are growing. And what we feel is that if we don't change, we are no longer going to be relevant. It's not like the ideas we have about how we learn and TDD and refactoring, XP, all these kind of things we value, they are still relevant. But if we don't get rid of the bits of our community personality that are harmful, then we'll no longer be relevant. Yeah. I have a bit here about journeyman, which is probably worth mentioning, and that's another part of the culture that is a little bit problematic. I was thinking about this a lot recently. We promote this idea of journeyman and the fact that as developers who are skilled and knowledgeable in everything and great generalists, we can go around the world and just pitch up at different companies and do some contract work and move around the globe as this kind of journeyman person, learning our craft, practicing our craft, refining our craft. And I was thinking about, wow, how much sort of male privilege is associated with that idea. We're in a space where there is constantly news about harassment of women at conferences, all sorts of events, meetups, at companies around the world where harassment is still a huge issue, and yet we're talking about the journeyman like it's such an easy thing to do. And this is such a good example of where craftsmanship is totally off mark. The rest of the world is talking about how hard it is for women to get anywhere in our industry, and we're talking about how easy it is to just move around the globe and practice our skills. So, that's another idea I think is totally useless to us. Let's just get rid of it. And that's kind of supported by the change in name. So saying, well, we're a software craft movement, not a craftsmanship movement. We're again getting rid of that idea of medieval craftsman guilds. Okay, I'm going to move on. Can you read this? Okay. So this is I just wanted to finish on, a comparison of the manifesto. So obviously I said there's a group of people who want to change the name, and if you change the name, you kind of have to change the manifesto. And I don't know if you're very familiar with the manifesto. On the left, I've got the Agile manifesto, on the right, the craftsmanship manifesto. I think this also is quite grandiose. It's quite elitist. Do we even need a manifesto is what I'm asking you. I mean, you can compare the language. I think when you look at the Agile manifesto, a lot of it makes sense. You know, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. That's things like saying, well, rather than just record everything in Jira, we'll just have a conversation about what's your newest bug, something like that. You know, working software with comprehensive documentation. For those of us who've worked in you know, non-agile environments and spent years like writing huge documentation, this is kind of a revelation. And to see it written down, you know exactly what it means. Same with customer collaboration, responding to change. You know, this is big if you're used to waterfall style of working. And then we go to the craftsmanship manifesto. You know, my favorite is like not only customer collaboration but also productive partnerships. What does that even mean? Does I mean, I'd ask you, but you know, there's a serious. It's kind of a joke, but it's serious. You know, this is people call us elitist. This is why. Like, what does this even mean? It doesn't really have a meaning beyond, you know, this customer collaboration. You know, people kind of have an idea. You might not be working in an environment where you're dealing with your own clients, but you'd know what this means. Just having a better working relationship with your customers. But you know, what does that add? I don't know if it adds anything. You know, our community is definitely important, right? It's definitely important. I mean, steadily adding value, okay. No, it doesn't really say much. So, you know, my point of this slide is not that this is terrible. Obviously, it's got us very far. A lot of us have probably signed it. But now that we're changing the name, we've got a chance also to come up with something new here. And this is a conversation that's going on at the moment. And if you join the Software Crafters Slack, you can just join this conversation as well. And I think it should be based on our values. And I don't know what those values are, but I guess my suggestion throughout all of this talk has been, that's what I'd like you to start thinking about, is what are these values which are important to us? And what are relevant to today's industry. Okay, so yeah, just a summary of everything I talked about. You know, growth and relevancy, that's very important to me, and I think it should be important to all of us. Some of us are trying to act like brand consultants and tell you, well, hey, these are the things we think we need to change. So what are our real values? Hopefully what I've talked about has helped you see how I think about things. Not saying that they're all the right answers or even close to a complete set of answers, but it would be great if it helped frame your thinking. And when you look at the things you hear in craftsmanship events, hopefully it will help you come up with your own ideas. So getting rid of whatever holds us back and focusing on what is good and what we want to keep from our culture, particularly around professionalism. What is that? You know, there's a whole, it really, I find it ironic when people who claim to be professionals go online. You know, Twitter is a great platform for this, and be very unprofessional, what I consider unprofessional, and yet they're claiming that they are professionals. So, yeah, that's a continued conversation. Getting involved in the wider community meetups. This is such a fantastic way to spread our message, and it doesn't need to be all about like craftsmanship at the fore. It can just be, helping sponsor or host events. And yeah, listen to those who care about branding. That's me. No. Cool. Thanks. Anybody want to? We've got 10 minutes. Any questions or comments? Discussion.
That way of hiring, does it scale? Because we are in that.
Does it scale?
Right now, and it's very complicated.
Wait. So what? Go.
I mean, going through the meetup path to find people that fits in the company culture, or I think it's. We are from Valencia, it's a small city here in Spain, and for us it's quite difficult. I think those ideas work, but in environments where you have a lot of fish to catch, but not for every situation. So we need to go to the craftsman path of hiring with the core view and with the exercise and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So you want to say you live in a small place and you need to hire everybody who lives there anyway? Is that what you say?
Yeah.
It's just important that we think about these ideas, because I think some people come to craftsmanship and they read the book on how apprenticeship should be, and then that's it. This is how we do it. But that's never going to help growth, or doesn't provide answers for bigger companies. So we need to start looking for the ideas that are helping us. And the approach I've shown is just what my experience is. It's not, it's just my experience. I don't have any statistics or facts for you on that.
In that case, maybe we can start non-technical people. We can teach them how to program or things like that.
I mean, if you get a small pool of people where you are, that means that you should start considering remote.
We are not going to, we are not the ones who have to make that call. Yes.
So, you don't mind, I took some notes of because there are some, I definitely agree with most of what you're saying there, but there are certain things that, I guess it would be interesting to clarify a little bit, because, for instance, you mentioned Myers-Briggs as a great way to understand a little bit better the different kinds of people that you will have in the team or in the company. But you could also fall into typecasting, because in the end that's what it is. When you do the test, oh, this is the rational guy, oh, this is the emotional guy. And the truth is that although sometimes we may have behaviors that we use most, we react to certain situations in a specific way, that's not only who we are. Right?
Yeah.
And, and because I've seen this also, right? It's like when we're thinking about who are we gonna promote for a specific role, or when this role wouldn't fit because this guy is like, but maybe he's perfectly capable of doing the job. But just that's something to be careful with. I think it's a great tool for self-discovery. In a sense, it makes explicit something that you already know, but you're not. Right? And also in teams, it can help you to create tolerance in certain aspects, but then you may fall into this is how he's going to react always.
Right.
And you sort of typecast that person as, what the test said it is.
Yep. So your point is that, personality testing, it really has its place.
Be careful about it.
Yeah.
Like how you use it.
I completely.
Because you can create sort of that isolation that you want to. It's just more categories. Thing, instead of having these are the guys that being happy, he's drinking beer, playing football, and so instead of that you'll have more.
I agree. I completely agree with you. I mean, I think what I should have said was, definitely don't use it for hiring, which a lot of companies do, especially the bigger employers. They will look at your CV and then they'll get you to do a personality test, and that's not what you want to do. And it's just a tool that has its place, and people change, and
people evolve. And you don't want to, rob that from them.
So there's definitely a caveat there. I think, I guess what I was trying to say is, it can be a useful stepping stone to understanding how to understand people. So if you're the sort of developer, just like I was, you spent your life writing code in a corner, in a dark room, and you don't really know who anybody is or how to interact socially with people. Having some mechanism for starting to understand people is a great first step. So I just see it as a tool in the toolbox. I definitely would not rely on it. And I think you reminded me that, for me there's just this kind of shift on a little bit. I also see the same thing as software craft. I don't necessarily see it as this sort of grand vision of the world, which I think a lot of people come to software craftsmanship and think it has an answer for everything. And part of what I was trying to get across is that in this shift towards software craft, I'm trying to move away from that elitism, that grandiose image. It's just another tool that we have, and there's no reason why software craft can't work in tandem with, whatever, you're doing XP at work, it's just another thing like XP almost, right? Like another value. If your software craft is hosting or sponsoring a meetup, they're just, it's just kind of ideal behind the meetup. So, again, it's another thing where I think of it, mentally I think of it as a tool in the toolbox.
I was thinking.
Go ahead.
If anyone wants to just stop me, okay? There are other more, let's say, controversial parts of what we were saying, like for instance, changing the name, etc. And I would be 100% behind changing the name if that was going to solve the problem. Because I think the changing the name moves us in that direction, I would say. But it's treating a symptom instead of the real problem behind it. Is if people are jerks, it doesn't matter what the movement is called, they're still going to be jerks. You know what I mean? Like if they're being elitists, if they're being, non-inclusive or whatever, that's going to continue happening whether you change the name or not. And for a time you get a, face wash kind of thing, right? Yeah. But eventually you will catch up if you don't do something about the real issue, which is, what kind of values are those people bringing to the movement, and how leaders in the community and leaders in the movement react to certain behaviors. Because before we were talking about culture and all these things, culture is learning, it's root learning. Yeah, it's what we learned from years of history, from being in a company, working in a specific. That's what the culture is, and the way that you change that is by seeing, most of the time, by seeing how leaders react, specifically in moments of crisis, let's say. So if we're in a conference and someone's being a jerk, and then the guy that sort of everyone looks up to joins in on the bashing or joins in on the harassment and whatever, that's only contributing to solidify those values, right? So again, I understand what the idea is, or what is being what's being tried to be accomplished there. To be more inclusive, really take all this technical, I would say, aspects of the name. It has man, it has this connotation with. We agree on that. It's going to help us get there. But that's a good way of ignoring all the stuff. You know what I mean? Yep. It's like, let's fight this battle, and then the other stuff is still going to be there. Yeah. I mean, what are we doing? No, because before you mentioned there's a sub-group or a subculture of the movement, let's say, that is trying to think about this. And, what else are we doing besides that? Yep. To treat these other things that I consider at least more important in that sense.
Yeah, so I think with the name and the manifesto change and these kind of things, people are coming at it from that angle. I guess I am presenting to you what we think of as a solution, but there's been a lot of thinking, well, what's the minimal amount of stuff we can do to get people to change that moves towards our goal, exactly like you say. And there are other symptoms that I think I decided I didn't want to talk about today in my talk. Because
that's fine. If you want, we can talk about the open space or whatever. But it's something that's very interesting because we were talking about it in the community.
Yes,
like, should we
absolutely.
change the name, etc. And again, I think we could do that. I'm not married to it, but
I think.
Huh?
I mean, you're being very rational.
Well, no, I can't.
It's not saying a message.
So you mentioned. Yeah.
So that's important.
It is important, and it's for people who are not necessarily aware of all of the things that are going on in our community, it can definitely help. A name change helps change the ideas of what a community is. Like, it's just less grandiose, if you say it's craft.
Again, I don't want to. I'm not opposing to.
No.
But I just think. What's the problem that we're trying to solve?
Yeah, I wanted to come back to your point.
Is that going to take us to solve that problem, or are we?
There is one problem.
We are taking steps to also exploring the problem, not only the solution, like this talk and a lot of other talks. So, for me, we have to changing the name is for visualization, for visible visualization, that there is something is happening, that there are people thinking there, that there are people that.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's.
I think this is a conversation that we definitely need to continue at the open space. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to come back to your.
I could go on and that, but
I think.
Let's explore that together.
You made a point about leadership that I think would be a great one to discuss at the open space, because that's definitely one problem. Okay.
Continue with that outside.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. Thanks very much, everybody.
thank you.